Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. It is King Crimson week. Man, I'm excited about this. One of my all-time favorite bands. I, I don't know, kind of like Neil Young we did recently. One that I've sort of put off for a while just because I'm sort of intimidating, daunting task to, to make some sense of King Crimson's work. Today's video is actually pretty easy because today we're just going through the studio albums. Only 13 of them. The next video is going to be the one that's going to be the challenge where we dive into the massive amounts of live material out there and some comps and all the side projects, the projects with a K in there. It's yeah, that's the next one though. Like I said, today's is a little more straightforward where we're gonna go through the studio albums. And I mean, King Crimson, as I'm sure many of you know, one of the foundational bands of progressive rock. It didn't quite get a lot of the mainstream play, other than there was a period in the '80s maybe they did a little bit, but compared to say, Genesis or Yes or whatever, any of the other ones, but just as significant in my mind, the greatest of those all of them all. I love King Crimson. So yeah, we're gonna get into it. They are one of the most challenging bands I think that you can, at least that I've come across, but also one of the most rewarding. I mean, the deeper you dive into their material, the more rewarding it is. So hopefully, maybe these two videos are especially for you if you're one of those people who you know of them. Maybe you've heard one or two of the records, but you know, you just go, where do you go from here? So maybe this will be helpful. I don't know. At least I get to talk about King Crim. Let's speak King Crimson for a week. I fell hard for King Crimson, and it was a relatively recent thing. I say recent, maybe 10 years ago, where I was maybe like some of you guys, heard the name, know they were really important, didn't really know anything about them, and I just decided to deep dive. I was in a record store, and uh, there were these two on CD box sets, the 21st Century Guide to King Crimson, Volume 1, Volume 2, each 4 CDs. So we're talking like 8 CDs of King Crimson, half of them studio, half of them live. I'll feature that a little bit in the next video. But yeah, I just decided, I'm going to dive deep. So I just grabbed those. Maybe it was too deep, too much too soon for a novice, because it was sort of overwhelming. I didn't really get it. Sort of put them aside. And then years later, I don't even remember what started it, but I just decided to explore them again, and it just like clicked. And I would say, like, this is about 8 to 10 years ago. For maybe between a 6 and a 12 year period, I was completely obsessed. I mean, all I wanted to listen to was King Crimson for half to a full year. I don't remember exactly how long it was. And man, I did a deep dive. I got everything I could and just dove into it. And I kind of came out on the other end of that, and I've been able to move on to the other musical things. But I still come back to them sometimes. And I wasn't even thinking about doing a Crimson week until I don't know, a couple days ago. For whatever reason, I just had the urge, started putting some on, and then got that old feeling again. And so I was like, yeah, okay, it's time. Let's go ahead and do it while I'm in the mood. Because you got to be in the mood for King Crimson. It's not a casual thing. All right, little bit of information on King Crimson here. The connective tissue, as most of you know, is Robert Fripp, the only member of the band who has been there the entire time. I counted, including Fripp, they have had 23 like official members through their history, and yeah, most of them essential members for whatever era it was. So it's not a case of like Robert Fripp and just a bunch of like faceless session guys or whatever. I mean, we're talking about Greg Lake, Mel Collins, Bill Bruford, John Wetton, Adrian Belew, Tony Levin, Gavin Harrison, and many others. I mean, just incredible musicians all. And what's awesome is, yeah, Fripp may be sort of the sun from which all the Crimson stuff, revolves. But when, each of these members of the band, plays crucial roles in that era. And so you get their personalities and their skills and all that too. So it's not just the Robert Fripp show at all. It's Robert Fripp and whoever he has in that incarnation of Crimson all playing kind of equal roles, whichever period you're in. So that's what's cool about that. All right, so this episode, we're going to go through their 13 albums. I'm going to do it a little bit differently than I usually do. Usually, we do the rankings where I rank from worst, from my opinion, worst to best. We will do that. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you my ranking. But as far as discussing them, we're going to go chronological because that really makes more sense with King Crimson because Crimson has very distinct eras and periods. And it gets real jumbled if we started with a ranking and I'm mixing all the eras. I mean, because they're almost like separate entities, each little era. And you can tell the Crimson story a lot better chronologically. So that's what we're going to do. And then at the end of the video, then I'll do the quick, all right, here's the order I've got the albums. So, I mean, we love ranking. We've got to rank them, so we will. But we'll do that kind of at the end. All right. With all that aside, we start at the beginning. 1969, in the court of the Crimson King. Some of that iconic album artwork there, right? One of the foundational records of progressive rock. I mean, there's arguments to be made of, what was the first real prog rock record, the most important in the early days, right? We're not here to argue that. I think you would have to agree, though. I don't know if you're making a top 5. This would be one of the top 5 most important, like, beginning foundational records in progressive rock. We can at least agree on that, probably. But I mean, an amazing lineup. This original lineup, Fripp on guitar, Greg Lake on bass and vocals, Ian McDonald on the woodwinds, Michael Giles on drums, and Peter Sinfield writing the lyrics. To me, so there are 3 tracks on here: 21st Century, Schizoid Man, which just has, I mean, phenomenal. These different parts in there, these different segments of that song, and just mind-blowing instrumentation and playing on there. Epitaph, which is gorgeous, and then of course the title track in the Court of the Crimson King, which is gorgeous. Those 3 songs are absolute essential classics of the entire genre. Okay, I do have a but here, though. Now, you'll see where I put this in the ranking. I will tell you it's not my number 1. I think for a lot of people, it probably would be their number 1 King Crimson record. I still have it high, of course, but my complaint with this one is Moonchild. 12-minute track is beautiful, but that sort of long instrumental break in there that's pretty minimalist. It to me, it sort of grinds the momentum to a halt. I think this would be one of the all-time perfect records in rock history if they had put kind of that shorter single version of Moonchild that I've heard, and then they would have room for like one more kind of rocker on there, one more, more aggressive track, which could have been Pictures of a City, which is on the next record, because they had that song in this era. They're already playing with it, so that could have been on here. I think if you do that, this would be one of the perfect records in all of the history of rock and roll. But still really important and pretty stunning and mind-blowing. Second record, In the Wake of Poseidon, 1970. Now, the lineup was already falling apart. McDonald and Giles had left. Greg Lake was out the door. Fripp is just desperately trying to hold the group together to at least put out another record. He does convince Giles to come back and drum on here. Speaking of Giles, God, his drumming is amazing. I know it's a little busy sometimes, but it's so engrossing. He's a great drummer. But he convinced Giles to come back. Funny story, they had a deal to get a very young Elton John to come do the vocals on here. At the last minute, supposedly Fripp kind of had a change of mind and said, no, kind of canceled the deal. Well, Elton didn't come on board, and he convinced Greg Lake to come back to at least lay down the vocals in exchange for King Crimson's PA system. So they basically paid Greg Lake to sing on here by giving him the PA system because he was already starting to talk to Keith Emerson and the whole ELP thing, right? So that's kind of the story here. This is, to me, it's a little bit of a step down from the debut. It follows similar structure. A lot of people have noted that. I think it does. Kind of opening. Well, you have a little short little acapella opener, but the real first song on there is sort of the big aggressive rocker on there, which is Pictures of a City. And then it gets a bit more kind of ethereal and all that. Although you got Devil's Triangle on the opposite side. Picture of City is great. The title track is beautiful. You can tell it's sort of another Court of the Crimson King type of thing, but it is beautiful with the Mellotron on there and everything. I love Cat Food. I think that's a pretty unique song in their repertoire. That amazing sort of jazz piano from Keith Tippett, who Fripp wanted to join as a permanent member, but Tippett didn't want to do it. So, but I think that's a pretty amazing song. The obvious filler is Devil's Triangle, which takes up 11, 12, however long minutes on the second side. It's something they've been playing live for a while. It's basically their rip-off adaptation, whatever you want to call it, of Gustav Holst's Mars. And yeah, to me, it's kind of clear filler and takes up a lot of the second side. So it's not just like one short little song in there. All right, moving on. 1970, shifting gears pretty dramatically to Lizard. And this is sort of a unique record in the Crimson catalog. It's probably the most proggy in some sense, as in sort of some of the silly, English stereotypes, of castles and knights and all of that kind of stuff. There's still some great stuff on there. For a long time, Robert Fripp sort of distanced himself from this record, but he's come around and appreciates it a bit more now. Gordon Haskell is on vocals, old school buddy of Fripp's, and he only lasts this record. He had a lot of conflict with Fripp and didn't really get the material. So before they could even tour for this, Haskell left and then ended up suing Fripp for the next 20 years for royalties on here. But you do have a guest vocal from John Anderson from Yes on the side long Lizard multi. John Anderson sings that first part of that. That's kind of cool. I don't know. Circus. I like Circus. Circus is cool. The sidelong piece Lizard is I think very good. Very good. Was it King Rupert's Lament? It's that thing near the end where Fripp does this just stunningly gorgeous guitar. I don't know what he uses on that, but it's a beautiful effect. But it's just beautiful. The one time I saw King Crimson live in 2017, where I got my T-shirt, they did that, and it was just one of the highlights of the show. They didn't do all of Lizard, but they did this like Lizard Suite where they do parts of it, and that part, and Fripp did that part, and it was just, it was gorgeous. Anyway, interesting, and they never really quite hit that vibe again. Let's see. Next, we've got Islands in 1971, still sort of evolving. We got Boz Burrell on bass and vocals on here. Mel Collins joins. The amazing Mel Collins on saxophone and other woodwinds joins as a full-time member. Ian Wallace on drums for this one. Yeah, Islands. This was sort of troubled as well. So it's like almost all of King Crimson's records are troubled, as far as the background, that was going on amongst the members. But there was a lot of tension on here because a lot of these other guys in the band, they sort of wanted to rock out, and do, kind of the, blues rock 70s classic rock thing, and that ain't what Robert Fripp's about. So there was a lot of push and pull on here, so it's kind of interesting. I think as you hear, Fripp's sentiments basically won out on here. Sailor's Tale is awesome. God, that awesome guitar work from Robert Fripp on there. The Letters is nice. Title track is pretty. This is not one of my favorite King Crimson records, though. And they broke up after that. And one of many times where Robert Fripp declared the end of King Crimson, until it wasn't. And, all these other cast members are gone. He starts from the ground up and creates a whole new band under the King Crimson name that is responsible for this remarkable run, this trilogy of records in the early to mid 70s. Remarkable. I think a lot of King Crimson fans believe this is the peak of King Crimson, is these three. So let's talk about them real quick. We start with Larks, Tongues, and Aspic in 1973. And the new lineup is Fripp on guitar, John Wetton on bass and vocals, Bill Bruford from Yes on drums, David Cross on violin, and Jamie Muir on percussion and just lots of sound effects. And one of my favorite stories about this is Bill Bruford leaving Yes to come join Crimson, because it's amazing. Bill Bruford said that he got bored. He didn't think Yes was challenging enough. Mind you, he had just recorded Close to the Edge, one of the all-time great classic progressive rock records. Plenty complex to me, but yeah, it didn't challenge him enough, so he needed to come over to Crimson. Well, this sure as hell is challenging. Larks, Tongue, and Aspic. Part one of that song is just insane dynamics. Insane dynamics on that thing. Yeah, like you got to turn your stereo way up to hear for minutes at a time, and then it comes blasting through the speakers. It's like crazy. Exiles is great. Easy Money is one of their all-time greats, although they would really expand that beautifully in the live setting for years, decades to come. And then that closing, the instrumentals, talking drum leading into Lark's Tongue and Aspic Part 2 is just stunning, jagged playing from Fripp, just brutal, just amazing. So, I mean, that is one of the great records, obviously. 1973, you have, 74, Starless and Bible Black, the next one. This, I think, is kind of a fascinating record because part of it is really tight, kind of, tightly constructed like studio tracks. And then part of it is just, they were touring so much they didn't have time to write a whole record, supposedly. So then they were doing this amazing stuff live. So they just filled the rest of it with this sort of live improvisation stuff, And so it's kind of an interesting record because you get kind of two sides of the group. I mean, The Great Deceiver, Lament, The Night Watch are really tight, tightly constructed songs. But then, of course, all of side two, Starless and Bible Black and Fracture, are just these expansive, partly improvisational. They're structured to Fracture. Robert Fripp has always said Fracture is the most complicated song, to play for him in all of King Crimson's repertoire. And also on side one, there's some of those improvisational songs. I always like the story with Trio, the song, where it was, Cross, Fripp, and Wetton. Bruford was there, but according to the story, Bruford didn't really hear any place for him to jump in, so he just kind of laid out and didn't play. Sometimes less is more, right? And Robert Fripp was so impressed with his decision to lay out that Fripp decided Bruford should have songwriting credit on it. And somewhere in there, I think in the liner notes, I don't know, somewhere in there, it says, for who plays what on the song. Bill Bruford, admirable restraint is what he's getting credit for, or something like that. Pretty awesome stuff. And then you have an astounding record. So Jamie Muir was out on here. They were a quartet here. David Cross is out, although Cross plays on some of these tracks. But they are officially down to a trio here on Red from 1974. Red. This is an incredibly influential record. It's brutal. I mean, again, for Robert Fripp's jagged guitar playing, it's just astounding on here. I mean, a lot of people love this one the most. You'll see where I put it, but it's incredible record. Um, it's kind of interesting. Robert Fripp actually was sort of pulling back, and he said kind of relinquished control. So a lot of this record was really Bruford and Wetton kind of guiding everything. And Fripp, of course, plays amazingly on it. It's a heavy record. It's a dark record. I mean, Red, Fallen Angel, One More Nightmare, Starless are all just amazing. Providence, to me, Providence is my least favorite, but it's still very interesting. Providence sort of sounds like the stuff that was on Starless and Bible Black, where it was an improvisational piece, from a show that they put on there. But yeah, this is an incredible record. Then they break up again. Robert Fripp again declares King Crimson is over. So fast forward to 1981, and you have the next trilogy of albums. Ones with these distinguished by these bright colors, right? And a new lineup, the '80s lineup. Now, if you watch my channel at all, I will frequently talk about this '80s lineup of King Crimson. It is my personal favorite lineup. I love it because I'm a big fan of kind of new wave, '80s stuff, and so this is this perfect combination of still King Crimson complexity and experimentation, but also with a lot of new wave sound and a lot of kind of new wave influences, like Talking Head influences. So you have Fripp, of course, on guitar, and Bill Bruford is back on drums, and then they bring in the great Tony Levin on bass and Adrian Belew on guitar and vocals, who had been working with Talking Heads, right? So, and this is the '80s lineup, that quartet, and I love every one of those musicians like to death, and I love what they do on these records. So you start in 1981 with Discipline, which I think is just astounding from start to finish. I've talked about this record multiple times. Fripp thought he was putting together a new band, and then all of a sudden he's like, this will just be the new King Crimson. So King Crimson is reborn. And it's just, for me, what stands out, listen to the intertwining complexity of Belew and Fripp's guitars. It's just incredibly complex intertwining lines. And of course you got Tony Levin, who can weave in and out of that too, and then Bill Bruford, who's just amazing. So I mean, it's hard to pick out highlights. Discipline is a great example of that intertwining guitar thing. Indiscipline is amazing, the shifting tempos and all that in there. Frame by Frame is just a great song, could have been a radio hit. Elephant Talk, I love the vocals on Elephant Talk, vocals and lyrics. Adrian Belew, a really strange lyricist, but really cool and engaging. Real quick, the next two in that trilogy, you've got Beat from '82, and then Three of a Perfect Pair from '84. I kind of talk about these sort of together because they are sort of similar. Not quite as amazing as Discipline, but I still love both of these. Both of them have some amazing, uh, just great kind of stuff that could be on the radio. I mean, they really were kind of streamlining. Yeah, maybe we can have some new wavy radio stuff. But then there's also some really out there, complex King Crimson-y stuff on here too. So interesting balance of that stuff on both of these. Um, and then Sleepless on here. Tony Levin's bass on Sleepless. Oh, wow. And then they break up. And then Robert Fripp announces King Crimson is over. Until it's not. Again, 1995, they reunite for Thrack. Thrack. I have come to really appreciate Thrack more recently. Man, this is probably, I don't know, it's hard to beat some of the stuff on Red, but this is probably some of their most like kind of brutal driving, sort of you could tell they're sort of influenced by some, like metal music, but also like Nine Inch Nails and stuff like that. Yeah, just kind of that vibe, but also King Crimson. It's kind of, and so it's some brutal stuff. Now this is an interesting concept. There's 6 people in the band now, so the 4 from the '80s are back, but then they have added Trey Gunn on the stick and bass, and Tony Levin plays the stick too. If you don't know what the stick is, it's sort of this really complex kind of bass-like instrument that I don't know, editor can throw a picture up there of someone playing the stick. But I mean, it's anyway. Levin and Gunn are both like masters of this instrument. And then Pat Mastelotto on drums. And so you have 2 guitars, 2 bass players, stick players, 2 drummers. And so this is what Fripp referred to as the double trio. And it's really interesting sonically because the album starts with all of them in the center of the mix. As the album progresses, it divides up into sort of a right and left channel where you have a guitar, bass, drum on each of the 2 channels, and they sort of separate and come back together. Anyway, it's an interesting concept sonically. I think this is some great stuff on here. Like I said, some brutal stuff, but also it contrasts with some beautiful, beautiful songs. Walking on Air, One Time, both really pretty kind of ballads almost. But then, yeah, I love the ba-boom going into thrack, those 2 instrumentals. I just think those are amazing. You listen to live stuff from this era, they experimented with that a lot. It's just so great. So great. All right, two more. Then and I'm going to feature some of this stuff on the next video. They did a lot of side projects between 95 and 2000 called The Projects. And we'll talk about all that. There's Project 1, Project 2, Project 3, Project 4, Project 10. There's all these projects. We'll talk about all that in the next video. But by 2000, they're ready to do kind of a proper Crimson record. Levin, I think, is tied up doing work for Peter Gabriel, because Tony Levin is in Peter Gabriel's regular band. So Levin was not available, not participating. I think Bill Bruford had retired by this point. So they're down to a quartet of Fripp, Ballou, and then Mastelotto and Gunn. Okay, for these last 2 official King Crimson records. So Construction of Light in 2000. Now this is Construction, and there's kind of this quartet here. Construction of Light. I do have the original on CD. I just didn't even pull it off the shelf. But they kind of Mastelotto came and re-recorded a couple years ago the drum parts, because they were all kind of on these electronic drums, which sort of dated itself. Mastelotto came back and sort of re-recorded on some real drums a lot of the drum parts, and they put this out, which they call Reconstruction of Light, which I think is better, and it's the only thing you can get on vinyl. They never issued the original Construction of Light on vinyl, so this is what you have. Oh, let me say this real quick. These last 3 records, Thrack, this one, and then the next one I'm going to talk about. Kudos to King Crimson, because to make them fit on records, because they're all original CDs, they had to use 3 sides, and a lot of other groups do that too when they're reissuing stuff on vinyl. But instead of, and I'm talking to you, Peter Gabriel, and I'm talking to you, Neil Young, and I'm talking to you, whoever else, instead of just copping out and putting like some etching on the side 4, what Crimson have done with these 3 records is they put all these bonus tracks and awesome stuff, like live material from the era, on that 4th side. That is cool. That's given us what we pay for here. So thank you, Robert Fripp and King Crimson, for that. Yeah, this may be one of their weaker records, Construction or Reconstruction of Light. It seems like they got out a lot of creativity on those projects in the previous years, and they didn't have as much to say on here musically, so to speak. I mean, there's some great stuff. I really hate Adrian Ballou's vocals on this. It has this sort of growling. I don't know. Is he trying to sound grungy? I don't know, but that bothers me on some of the Prozac Blues and The World's My Oyster Soup Kitchen Floor Wax Museum, Into the Frying Pan. Not a fan of his vocals. There's one song on here, even though this isn't a great album, there's one song on here that stands out as like one of the most gorgeous tracks in all of King Crimson's history, and it's the closer. it's Heaven and Earth, which is actually a leftover thing from those project years, Project 10, and they stuck it on here. It's a stunner. It's a gorgeous, beautiful instrumental that builds and just But yeah, that's the only thing on here that I really like. The title track is cool, but they did it better live in later years. So okay, last one. The last official King Crimson studio record was 2003, and that's The Power to Believe. And there's that last lineup on this studio record. I keep giving you this caveat because Crimson has been very active in the last decade, but it's all live material they've been putting out. So this is the last of the studio records under the official Crimson name. They've done some side projects. That's all in the next video. It's complicated. This one I think is a little bit better than Construction or Reconstruction of Light, but it's sort of in the same vein, same feel. But yeah, there's Power to Believe. This sort of repeating theme on there is good. Level 5, pretty brutal stuff, kind of going back to the thrax sound a bit. And then Eyes Wide Open is beautiful kind of ballad, soft ballad song is great. I love the instrumental Dangerous Curves. It's another killer. It just builds and builds and just awesome. I don't know. Sounds like should have been on a video game or something. It's like a good driving video game. It's so cool. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. Okay, so editor is gonna make a cut here while I reorder these so I can show you real quick my rankings. I did promise you I would rank these. So let's do it. So cut. Okay. I have put the records back in order so I can show you my rankings, my personal rankings, worst to best of the King Crimson studio albums. Well, no surprise if you listen to the video so far. I do have Construction or Reconstruction of Light as the last one. Like I said, Heaven and Earth is the only one that really jumps out at me on that. Although it is kind of cool that one of the bonus tracks is on the vinyl is the Deception of the Thrush, which was something they played around with for like 10 years in this era, but didn't appear on a record, but they have it there. A lot of live records. But number 12, going back to Islands. Probably also not a surprise based on how I talked about it. There you go. Then let's see, number 11, the final studio record, The Power to Believe. There you go. Then number 10, going all the way back to the second record, In the Wake of Poseidon. I like I said, this is good, except for I do think Devil's Triangle is a long piece of filler on the second side. And they should have put Groon on there, which was this great B-side, which is available on a lot of live stuff. But yeah, it does sound like they're just sort of following the template of the debut to kind of diminishing returns in my view. Number 9 is where I do put The Strange Lizard. All right. And number 8, again, this has thrack. This has grown in my estimation in recent years. Pretty powerful stuff. And honestly, I keep listening to it. I don't know, it might work its way even further up, but yeah, looking at what's ahead of it, that would be hard, but I guess it could. All right. Now, this one might upset a few people. I don't know, upset, but you may disagree with me having it this low. I love it. I'm a huge King Crimson fanatic, so I love all this stuff, really. But yeah, at number 7, I do have Starless and Bible Black. As amazing as some of the improv stuff is, I do think it meanders a bit in places. I know a lot of people really like that record a lot. In my 6th and my 5th slot, I talked about them together in the video, so I can talk about them together here. At number 6, I would have Beat, and at number 5, I would have Three of a Perfect Pair. I told you, I've just got a thing about 80s King Crimson. I know that both of these are way lower on a lot of people's rankings. I have seen other people's rankings. I am aware of that. I just don't care. I dig these records. I love them. All right. Number 4, where probably a lot of people have it number 1. If I were trying to do, looking at it through like the history of rock and roll and importance, this should be number 1. But yeah, I do have the debut at number 4. We're in 5-star territory already. So yes, I believe this is a 5-star record. I love this record. Please don't get me wrong, that just because I have 3 ahead of it. I just think these 3 ahead of it are just more amazing to me. But yeah, so again, what I said when I was talking about it, I think Moonchild, like 12 minutes or whatever, that's the only flaw here. At number 3, I do have Larks' Tongues in Aspic, probably one of the most challenging and fascinating of their records. But yeah. In the 2 slot, so 1 and 2. What is it? Well, the other one that a lot of people maybe have at their number 1, I do have Red. I mean, nothing more I can say about Red. It's an incredible record. But you know, I love 80s Crimson. So for me, my number 1, my favorite King Crimson record is Discipline. To me, it's just astoundingly great, bringing together 2 things that I love: their experimentation and complexity, and some of that kind of new wave sound, and just genius, brilliantly bringing it together. There you go. All right, guys. So that's my King Crimson ranking. Next time, next episode, I've got a task in front of me. We have to dive into the live material, the projects, the comps. Yeah. Get ready to geek out, because that's what we're going to do. But I think I've got some great. The helpful thing about it is, in that jungle, I will pull out some really helpful, like, check these things out if you want to dive in, because it can be intimidating. It can be daunting. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, like the videos, all that great stuff. We'll see you next time. More King Crimson.